Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey-Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, November 19th. We will hear the presentation, Planning for Innovation in Transportation. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the questions box located in your GoToWebinar tool panel. For your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in that questions box and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. If you want your question to be answered by a specific panelist, please state so in the question. That just helps me when I'm filtering through and working through the questions. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2021. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we're sponsored by the Transportation Planning Division of APA, so thanks to you all for joining us this year and for providing this and many other sessions. This is it. This is what we've got left for 2021. We have 3 sessions, so head over to ohio.org/planning webcast to register for those. We are actually booked for January and February of 2022. I'm just busy gathering the information for that, and registration for those sessions will be open soon, again, on our webcast website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing. You can record those credits by heading over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or event number. And hey, folks who are either in your grace period, which is about to end, or your regular CM period, if you still need those law and ethics, we got you covered. We have 1 ethics and 1 law session, both worth the required amount, 1.5, that are available for on-demand viewing. So you can view them whenever you want and log those credits. And that information, again, is on our website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. Up at the top, there's a tab, I believe it says on-demand sessions. You click there and you'll get the YouTube links to the 2 on-demand sessions that you can view. And if you're on social media, make sure you like us on Facebook. Just search Planning Webcast and we'll pop up. That's where I post important information like date or time changes. I also post when a batch of new sessions are available for you to register for. And I like to send little weekly reminders of our upcoming sessions. Also, we record all of our sessions and we post them up on our YouTube channel. So be sure to subscribe to our channel. Just search Planning Webcast and we'll pop up along with our well over 350 recordings. So be sure to subscribe so that you get notified when I upload a new session. So that's it with for my housekeeping items. Again, as you think of questions, type them in that questions box. Don't use the raise your hand function. Just type those questions in and we'll get to them at the end during the Q&A. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Andy, who is going to kick us off. And Andy, those controls are now yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for attending today. And I'm Andy Wolpert with the City of Columbus, and I served as a Deputy Program Manager for the Smart Columbus program. For those of you that may not be familiar, in 2016, the United States Department of Transportation issued a challenge, Smart City Challenge, and there were 78 cities that applied for this grant, and it was $40 million. And Columbus won. And the goal was to see how transportation could be improved through technologies. And so what we want to do is to improve that safety, reliability, and mobility for our residents and visitors here in Columbus by seeing how intelligent transportation systems could impact day-to-day lives. As part of this, we developed a performance measurement plan. We had identified 6 outcomes that we wanted to measure as part of all of our projects. And these outcomes are similar to any outcomes that a city would have when they're deploying any new types of projects. In addition to the $40 million from the US DOT, the city also was awarded $10 million from the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation. And there were 5 priorities as part of that grant. It was $10 million. First was decarbonization, and that was the utility companies decarbonizing their grids. The second was that electric vehicle fleet adoption, where the City of Columbus purchased over 200 EV vehicles. Other private fleets or private companies purchased EVs as part of the program too. 3 was promoting transit use, multimodal transportation, and we tested autonomous vehicles in the city. The 4th was the consumer adoption of electric vehicles. So really working with dealerships, having ride and drives, getting the public to test EVs and feel comfortable with them. And then the last was ensuring that we had charging infrastructure that could support EV adoption. So the portfolio of projects for Smart Columbus was rather large. So we had everything from connected vehicles, where we installed equipment at traffic signals and in vehicles that would communicate with each other, provide information to the driver and to the network. We had an application that was enhanced. We already had the Park Columbus app, and we enhanced that app to allow for reservations, payments, through the app for parking. Our autonomous vehicles, we had a couple deployments here in Columbus, in downtown and in our Linden neighborhood. And then ensuring that we're providing equitable access to transportation through our trip planning application called Pivot and our smart mobility hubs. And as I just mentioned, through EVs, providing that charging infrastructure and adoption from the public. So I'll talk about a few of our projects here. In particular, our multimodal trip planning application, which we called Pivot. So the city and US DOT really shared a vision that the future of transportation would be less single occupancy vehicles, more on-demand, more multimodal transportation. And so we wanted to make that shift away from personally owned vehicles and provide the tools to allow people to understand what modes are available, how you can reach your destination without having a vehicle. And we used a solution that has public and private mobility providers as part of it. It's an open source software program using Open Trip Planner, so it's very sustainable, cost effective, and it's a way you could plan and book and then pay for parts of your trip through the app. These are our partners as part of the project. So you can see we have the transportation network companies such as Uber and Lyft. We have our local cab company, Yellow Cab Taxi. At the center of it is COTA. That's our Central Ohio Transit Authority, which is the leader in transportation here in Central Ohio. And we have micromobility such as Bird and Lime, and Kogo's our bike share. Along with Link was just added as a scooter company. And we had a lot of work with Morpsey and their Go Ohio Commute program to integrate that into our program, which is promoting car sharing. And then our OSU campus area bus system. So how this works is all these modes of transportation provide us with data feeds through APIs. So we're getting real-time information based upon the preferences that the user can enter into the application, whether they want the fastest or most cost-effective, or if they don't like certain modes of transportation. All this information is used. We have traffic information that we're getting from various data sources. weather information. This all develops your trip and your routing and lets you know what time, how long it would take, and where you need to make your transfers, switch modes. So you can select your trip, hit start, and then you can begin your journey. And all of this information then, once your trip is executed, is stored in our Hyperledger. It's a blockchain. And so it can go back into our trip optimization machine learning engine to help with future trips that are going to be planned. During our demonstration period, which was unfortunately delayed because of COVID, we were initially going to kick off in April, May of 2020, and we delayed that until December of 2020. And then we ended the pilot demonstration period in April of 2021. We had over 1,000 downloads, many accounts created, and had over 400 multimodal trips taken during that time frame. And you can see here on the lower left-hand corner, kiosks were located in the downtown short north area of Columbus and our smart mobility hubs. And those kiosks do have the Pivot application on them in case you don't have a smartphone to make those trip plans. So the Ohio State University was our partner as far as the performance measures and evaluation process, collecting data and doing the evaluation. What we did find was that there was a significant increase and from the survey takers providing their feedback, how easy it was to transfer modes. There was some increase in being able to access healthcare and entertainment. They felt this eased that process. Customer satisfaction was very high, and the vast majority of respondents thought that Pivot was very easy to use. And so we wish we would have had more time, and transportation would have been more prevalent during this time frame. But during the pandemic, I think everyone saw that the use of modes of transportation, particularly public transit, has really decreased. Some lessons learned, really engaging stakeholders early and often, getting focus groups together, beta testers to help you develop the look of the application, and help you test it out, provide that feedback so you can change and it can evolve and grow, is extremely helpful. Whenever you're working with software development, taking an agile approach, so incremental development and testing throughout. So if you're going to fail, you fail fast, and you resolve the issue and you move forward and you keep going through that process. We had tried to develop a common payment system as part of this too. We found very challenging for many reasons. Getting the business case out there to mobility providers to essentially have this one common transportation wallet that can pay for everything. So you can load your wallet. So if you didn't have access to a credit card, for example, you could go to a point of sale location, load cash into your wallet. Many challenges with that we face here in the US. So what we ended up doing was going to a deep linking process where if you want to pay for a mode of transportation, the app would take you to the app for that mobility provider to make the payment. And micromobility, I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but scooters just kind of dropped into Columbus, Bird being the first, and followed by Lime. And so we had to adjust not only from a policy perspective, but then trying to incorporate this into our application. And so really working with them, the software, the open source software, didn't have to deal with scooters previously. And so we enhanced that open source software to allow for that so other cities that use that software can benefit from it. Also talk about our smart mobility hubs. So currently in Columbus, we have a fixed bus route service. We previously had a transit system redesign about 3 or 4 years ago. CODA went through that. we have park and ride facilities. We have a bus rapid transit line along our Cleveland Avenue corridor in through our Linden neighborhood. Buses have Wi-Fi, which is great. And we have these mobility providers that really work independently. We're kind of siloed. And so some of the issues that we heard from public is how can we make this work, these modes work together better? And so we really wanted to focus on our opportunity neighborhoods. Those are some areas that have had challenges, particularly transportation challenges in the past, and really wanted to build around our bus rapid transit line along Cleveland Avenue. So we looked at the Linden Avenue, the Linden neighborhood. And so with this, we wanted to really bridge that first mile, last mile gap to access public transportation, provide better access to jobs, goods, and services along that Cleveland Avenue corridor. And then also in the Easton Transit Center. Easton's a large commercial area in the city of Columbus, and there's many people from the Linden area that go to Easton either for work or for shopping. So wanted to make that connection too. And so our solution was bringing information and modes of transportation together. So this is the physical melding of transportation modes, where Pivot, our transportation planning app, was the digital melding of those. And so with this, we identified those locations. We wanted to have these modes of transportation available and information. So primarily, we have ride sharing, accessibility. We have locations for car sharing, bike share, scooters that are parked, park and ride facilities, EV charging at one of our park and rides, and all of them have kiosks. And with these kiosks, they all have emergency call buttons in case there's an emergency, and then they all have the Pivot app. Here's some photos of some of the Mobility Hub features. Upper left, you can see we developed some pavement markings for dockless scooters and bikes. So you just don't have them all over the sidewalks, blocking that pedestrian access routes, making sure it's ADA accessible. So trying to push all of those scooters and bikes that are dockless to one area. You can see we added some docking stations at a couple of our hubs too, to build out our COGO network. We had signage to identify what features were available at each of the hubs. And then there's a picture again, once again, of our kiosks. So with this, some outcomes, we did add 4 new bike share locations in Linden. I had over 1,000 trips to and from the hub, so that was fantastic. Interactions with the kiosk, over 65,000 at the hub. So it's people connecting to the Wi-Fi that are provided through the kiosk. And from a customer satisfaction standpoint, unfortunately, we wanted to do surveys out in the public, have those our administrators or go out to the sites and collect that information. Because of COVID, we couldn't, so we really couldn't get the feedback that we were looking for. And we're hoping, as this continues, more usage is used through these kiosks, through the smart mobility hubs, as travel keeps increasing. Some lessons learned through this: stakeholder engagement, like any project, is critical. Getting to know what those needs are from the public, what locations are important to them, where these would be beneficial for the public to access. Mobility provider agreements are necessary and can take time. So really have to allot some time to work through that with mobility providers. And then leveraging contributions. The kiosks were provided by Ike Orange Barrel. They were beginning to be constructed and installed downtown, and we wanted to have some consistency across the entire city. So we piggybacked an agreement they had with Experience Columbus, our recreation destination arm of City of Columbus, and it's nonprofit, and piggybacked that agreement so that we could use those kiosks here. And then communications, getting word of mouth out that once the hubs are up and operational, that people have access to them and are aware of them. And then our autonomous vehicles, I'll talk about our Linden Leap project. For this project, we really wanted to ensure that the public had access to jobs, goods, and services, and trying to connect important centers through neighborhoods, such as community centers and food sources. We really wanted to resolve that first mile, last mile challenge to grow public transit ridership with CODA. We wanted to establish guidelines. There's not been many AV deployments out there, so we wanted to go through the process and document it, and then provide our lessons learned so people could learn from the experiences we had. To begin, we had many stakeholder meetings, internal and then external, trying to determine where best this type of technology could be used and could serve a purpose to the neighborhood, achieve our goals. So we developed about 12 different routes. The first step was we just drove these routes, and talking with the industry, understanding what capabilities they have. We essentially eliminated some of the routes based on complexities. So we narrowed it down to 4. And then we issued an RFI to gain as much information we could about these routes, what is feasible, what to look for, and got that feedback from the industry. And so through that, we scored our routes, and then we selected our ultimate route, which went through the Linden neighborhood, which actually connected 2 of our smart mobility hubs, one at St. Stephen's and one at the Linden Transit Center. The services provided along this route included a recreation center. St. Stephen's has a food bank, educational services, daycare services, healthcare services. So all this is very important. Help provide that first mile, last mile connection to the Cleveland Avenue corridor and the bus rapid transit line along Cleveland Avenue. So really filling that transit gap here. We developed a test plan. We were testing here, preliminary testing in the parking lot of St. Stephen's with scooters, just testing for vulnerable road users. We had a factory acceptance test that occurred in France, where these vehicles are manufactured. And then preliminary acceptance testing in a closed environment, and then final acceptance testing when we actually went out the road. And some of you may have heard about 2 weeks after we launched the passenger service, we did have an incident where the vehicle was pulling away from one of the stops and made a sudden stop, and a passenger slipped from their seat and fell to the floor. And so with that, we stopped the service. Easy Mile began an investigation. That's who manufactured the shuttles. We informed the USDOT, and Nvta began to perform an evaluation too. And all the Easy Mile shuttles across the United States were shut down until they could determine what caused it. Essentially, there's a safety chain in these types of vehicles. If something doesn't act as it's supposed to, it automatically has a stop, the emergency stop. So when it was pulling away from the stop and then making it S-curve back to go along the roadway, it overcompensated ever so slightly, so it stopped. And so it did what it was supposed to do. It was just abrupt, and passengers weren't expecting that. So with that, the pandemic started a couple weeks after that incident. And so we were waiting to get back into passenger service, but due to the pandemic, social distancing and sanitation, we did not return to passenger service. So what we did, we reached out to the community again, well, what could we do? And during that time frame, getting access to fresh foods was really important during the pandemic. And so St. Stephen's saw a major uptick in access to their food pantry. And so we tried to help offload that by delivering food from St. Stephen's to the Rosewind Community Center, which was the center of the largest public housing development in the city of Columbus. So we're bringing food to the neighborhood to ease that access to fresh foods. So with this vehicle, we had over 800 miles traveled. We had 265 walk-up visits. So once again, really reducing the challenges to accessing fresh foods. We served over 130,000 meals, and we delivered more than 50,000 masks, and had a customer satisfaction rating from those we interviewed and talked to of over 90%. Right. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Justin. Just a second here. There we go. It's coming.
Handoff underway.
All right, there you go.
All right, thanks, Andy. Andy, are we seeing my screen?
You look good.
Great, thanks. Well, I'm Justin Goodwin, Transportation Planning Manager here at the City of Columbus. So I'm in the same department as Andy, the Department of Public Service. And I'm going to talk about another very ambitious initiative that the city is undertaking as part of a regional partnership called LinkUs. It's of similar ambition to the Smart Columbus program that Andy just talked about. A little bit of a difference, or a couple of differences. One, I'm going to provide a snapshot of where we are in the midst of developing this initiative and developing a comprehensive program of mobility and infrastructure implementation, also with an emphasis on the word infrastructure, the hard infrastructure. So whereas Smart Columbus has been primarily focused on technological innovation in transportation, certainly with some infrastructure elements such as the smart mobility hubs that Andy mentioned. LinkUs is much more focused on the hard infrastructure side of our transportation system. And together, these two initiatives will dovetail well as we implement infrastructure and integrate what we've learned through the technological innovations that Smart Columbus has advanced and tested. And also, Andy has given an overview, sort of a summary of a completed program through the Smart Cities Challenge. And again, we're in the midst of developing this program called LinkUs. So a little bit about just some background on Columbus and Central Ohio. We are a fast-growing region. We're changing very rapidly, and it's bringing growth challenges, growth pains to the city and the region as a whole. We are now the 14th largest city in the U.S. by population, still under a million for the city of Columbus, a little over 2 million for our MSA. But we are the fastest growing city in the Midwest, one of the fastest growing in the country. We're projected to be a region of 3 million people by 2050. For those familiar with Columbus, may know us as America's test market. Many companies throughout the country test products and services here in Columbus based on our demographic composition. And of course, it'd be remiss if I didn't note that we are home to the Buckeyes at The Ohio State University. Mention our fast growth, again, 14th largest city of the 14 largest cities and fastest growing cities over the past 10 years with the 2020 census numbers out. We're one of the top 14 cities that have gained more than 100,000 people in population over the past census period. And again, this map shows really the only one in the Midwest. So it's rare company that we find ourselves in as Columbus is changing. And that history of growth over the past 50, 60 years or so has brought great opportunities, also challenges and inequities. You can see the maps on the side of the screen. In 1950, Columbus was a relatively small proportion of the Franklin County land area, although a significant portion of the overall population, through sewer service, utilities, and annexation policies that began in the 1950s and through the remainder of the last century. Columbus grew territorially quite expansively, to the point where now we're over 220 square miles. We don't have many natural barriers that are hemming the city in, and so we've continued to grow outwards, to some might say to sprawl outwards, alongside our various suburban jurisdictions, some of which are now entirely surrounded by the city of Columbus, and some which continue to grow on the edges. The larger map on the screen may be familiar to many people, or some version of this from other cities, is a historic redlining map showing the Hulk classifications from the 1920s, 30s that classified certain areas of our city as undesirable in terms of receiving mortgages and homeowners insurance. The red areas in the city, primarily low income, Black populated, minority populated areas. And as we look at the patterns of growth throughout our city today, there have been long lasting impacts on access to opportunity in many of those neighborhoods. And many of those neighborhoods were also impacted by the development of the highway system, particularly the inner belt portions of our highway system here in central Ohio, and continue to feel the unintended and sometimes intended consequences of transportation infrastructure that is inequitably provided access throughout our region. And that's some of the background that we want to bear in mind as we're thinking about a next wave of substantial infrastructure investment in our city and throughout the region. Our growth trends now, the history of growth from those maps, from a small central nucleus of a city to a pretty sprawling city in that pattern of annexation. You can see on this the graph to the left, our rate of annexation has substantially declined moving through the past 20 years or so, to the point that our territorial expansion is essentially stopping at this time. Yet you can see our population growth continues to rise. So we're not really growing outward anymore at the rate that we were, but we're adding more population to the land area that we already have, and much of that is happening in the more historic urban core portions of the city, although not only in those locations. We think about how people get around with our sprawling development patterns that we have. No surprise, primarily by single occupant vehicle, like many other cities of our size and with a trajectory of growth such as us. About 80% drive alone today, and a fairly small percentage walking, biking, public transit, although we have a really fabulous transit system delivered by the Central Ohio Transit Authority, and I'll talk more about our partnership with them through the course of this presentation. And really, as Andy mentioned, many of the goals of Smart Columbus are how do we leverage technology to foster mode shift. That's part and parcel with how we're thinking about our next wave of infrastructure investment in our transportation systems. The impacts of car dependence in our region, again, exacerbate some of those historic inequities from our development patterns and past infrastructure investment decisions. So many of those historically redlined communities are also neighborhoods with less access to vehicles, who bear the brunt of higher household costs and transportation costs that affect overall quality of life, access to opportunity, access to jobs. And we know that as our growth pressures continue, we're going to need to take a really comprehensive approach to addressing those issues and providing access to opportunity. Our mayor, Mayor Ginther, likes to say that Columbus is America's opportunity city, and also the transportation can be an equalizer if we make strategic investments in our system. And that was really part of the Smart Columbus initiative, and it's core to LinkUs as well. And this is about addressing these 21st century challenges that we have as we think about how we grow more equitably and bring more opportunity to those who live and work in our communities. So the LinkUs initiative has adopted the 6 core themes or goals that we see on this slide. And it's really a comprehensive approach to thinking about the interrelationship between our transportation infrastructure and access to opportunity, access to jobs, access to healthcare, as well as the sustainability of our region, both fiscal sustainability and environmental sustainability. So LinkUs is a partnership. It's a collaborative partnership for strategic growth and investment in our mobility systems, not just in the city of Columbus, but our region, primarily Franklin County. Our region is certainly broader than Franklin County, but most of our population growth is occurring in Franklin County. You see the map here is showing a diagrammatic representation of a comprehensive system of high capacity rapid transit corridors and development growth corridors. And this really is looking to create a complete integrated system along corridors where we are seeing growth happening already or where there's a strategic benefit in targeting growth. Our principal sponsors of LinkUs are the City of Columbus, as well as I mentioned, COTA, the Central Ohio Transit Authority, as well as our MPO, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, and Franklin County. Although this partnership of implementation really relies on a strong collaboration between the public and private sectors, such as the Columbus Partnership, who had a pivotal role in Smart Columbus, as Andy mentioned, as well as the various other suburban jurisdictions, municipalities, and other government agencies like the Ohio Department of Transportation. This initiative is really an implementation initiative. It's about moving from planning and foundational planning that our region has been undertaking over the past decade, especially in the past 5 to 6 years, and taking these planning concepts and making them a reality. MORPC, our NPO, led an initiative back in 2014 called Insight 2050. This was really an assessment of how our region could and should grow as we move forward. And it looked at various scenarios for regional growth. What happens if we continue to grow along a business as usual trajectory of outward expansion under current land use policies? What happens if we start looking at a more strategic growth pattern, more focused growth, more emphasis on infill and redevelopment, and utilizing infrastructure that we already have, both utilities and transportation infrastructure? A couple of years after that, about the time that the Smart Columbus initiative was getting going, COTA also led a planning initiative called NextGen, looking at the next 30 years or so of potential investments in the transit system, in the fixed route transit system, as well as emerging first mile, last mile services that COTA is now beginning to implement through programs such as what they call COTA Plus, which is an on-demand service. And the NextGen plan looked at a series of potential high capacity rapid transit corridors. Those concepts from Insight 2050 and NextGen were combined with the Insight 2050 Corridor Concepts initiative, a study completed a couple of years ago now that looked at how we take this idea of focused growth and really focus it on a very strategic way on regional transportation corridors and couple growth investment with transportation investment with a focus on high capacity rapid transit. And the outgrowth of all of these efforts is the LinkUs initiative. It really is intended to be the implementation arm of the planning concepts that were developed through these other studies and initiatives. Insight 2050, it looked at 5 model corridors, and what that study found was with that right coupling of infrastructure investment and development policy, we could accommodate a substantial amount of that regional projected growth within just a few major corridors within our region, let alone many other corridors that could experience a similar type of growth. So 55% of new households, perhaps 60% of new jobs, and bringing better access, increasing mode shift, increasing tax revenue for our municipalities to make the types of service and infrastructure investments that we need to make, bringing benefits and lower household and transportation costs for the people living in these portions of our region. So as an outgrowth of the Insight 2050 Corridor Concept Study, the region was really excited. What do we do now? How do we make it happen? And our core implementing agencies that I mentioned, Columbus, COTA, Wolpert, the county, came together very quickly and began a series of conversations about what the next steps are going to be. And the outgrowth of those conversations became what is now called LinkUs. Our partners developed a framework strategy. It's available on our website at linkuscolumbus.com. And it's really the organizing document that establishes this implementation effort and really lays out a vision for what we have now come to call mobility corridors. And when we use this phrase, we're really talking about that combination of mobility infrastructure investments, the hard infrastructure investments, as well as service investments when it comes to transit specifically. But it's not just about transit, it's about the walkability, the bikeability, the overall quality of the public realm along these corridors, and coupling that with compact connected development patterns, more sustainable development patterns. And at the end of the day, it's about the opportunities that brings for the people who live and work or traveling through these corridors. The framework strategy really lays out a vision for a next level of transit investment in Central Ohio, a level of transit investment that we have not had to date. With an emphasis on dedicated transit right-of-way. That core hard infrastructure element of making sure that if we're really providing premium transit, that we are prioritizing movement of transit through the public right-of-way and not requiring our transit vehicles to be stuck in traffic with everybody else, as well as integrating technologies such as some of the programs that Andy talked about. And looking ahead to how technology evolves and what does that mean for transit vehicles moving forward, leveraging technology as we make near-term investments. And the framework strategy lays out what we call ingredients for success. LinkUs itself, just identifying this brand, this unified effort, this collaborative partnership, is itself one of the innovations here, the really strong alignment of our implementing agencies in a way that we haven't seen in the past, and building those partnerships to leverage regional support for implementation. Also, the integrated system approach that we're taking, both from a high capacity transit system, but the integration of other modes of transportation as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Making sure we're being transparent, of course, engaging the community through the broader initiative as well as specific projects that we're developing as well. And really key to this is identifying the funding strategy to make some pretty substantial infrastructure investments in our region. So I mentioned mobility corridors, showed a map earlier. Again, here's a version of that map. We have undertaken various aspects of initial planning for 3 key corridors as part of this vision of an integrated high capacity rapid transit system. Highlighted on this map, actually 4 are highlighted, 3 are moving forward into the next stages of design right now. I'm managing the Northwest corridor, the pink line on this map. And again, this is part of the innovative collaboration as well. We have the city of Columbus actually contract managing the planning and design process for one of these high capacity transit corridors in close partnership, both through financial agreement and through co-project management with COTA, the transit agency, while COTA is also managing 2 of the BRT projects, and these are all identified as bus rapid transit projects moving forward in next stages of design. So we've done pre-planning work through 2019 and 2020. We've identified locally preferred alternatives, done a mode analysis, identified bus rapid transit, premium bus rapid transit as the preferred mode for each of these corridors. Each corridor, the blue lines on the map, as they come online through their own planning processes, we'll do a mode analysis for each of them. And now the Northwest Corridor is moving into 10% design, and West Broad Street and East Main Street are about to enter 30% design. Broad and Main were just over the past month formally accepted into the Federal Transit Administration's project development process, so that initial stage of the federal funding grants process. So we're really excited about that. This is just a shot of a few images from our Northwest Corridor planning report, the phase 1 report that came out earlier this year, identifying the alignment for the transit corridor, for a portion of the transit corridor, as well as design concepts. You can see in the thumbnails here, looking at various different potential right-of-way configurations, again, with that emphasis on dedicated transit way. Could be center running bus rapid transit, could be curbside running, could be a combination of those, depending on the varying development context throughout the corridor, and that applies to all of the corridors, really right-sizing the infrastructure design with the surrounding development context, as well as the future development opportunities at transit station locations that we're in the process of identifying, as well as how we integrate the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and set up the public realm to foster the type of coordinated development patterns that we envision here. With that in mind, the transit supportive, transit-oriented development portion of this is really critical. Again, that idea of integrating compact connected development with the infrastructure investment. So our phase 1 report for the Northwest Corridor, while it really emphasizes the opportunities for the hard transportation infrastructure, it also outlines a vision for development at transit station locations, a series of development principles, design guidelines for transit-oriented development as station locations would come online through implementation. And just by way of graphic representation of how we see these principles being applied, this is a portion of the Northwest Corridor today, a relatively auto-oriented 4-lane roadway. What could it look like through implementation of the types of infrastructure and coordinated development patterns that we envision through LinkUs? So again, it really is about creating this new type of place. It's not just about moving people through a corridor, but it's creating a place that people are trying to get to, whether it's living there or working there, and really integrating the design of the public and private realms to create a quality place within our region. Again, I've mentioned this is about implementation. So we are here in wrapping up 2021, we've selected alternatives for 3 of these corridors. We're now moving into the design process. These are multi-year processes as we move through the FTA, the federal funding process. It can take 5, 6, 7 years to implement a bus rapid transit line. And getting to construction and opening, that's the big question we get. When are we going to see these lines operating on the ground? We're well positioned to have 3 premium bus rapid transit lines operating within this decade. There's still a lot of work to do, but what's really critical, we know, and I mentioned this earlier, is identifying our funding strategy. How are we going to sustain this system and this next level of infrastructure investment? And we're really at a critical point in this process and this initiative for answering that question. And with that in mind, with that objective in mind, earlier this fall, at the end of the summer, our partners between the city CODA, the MPO, the county, formed what we call a leadership coalition, a steering committee and an executive committee of about 45 regional leaders, both in the public and private sector, nonprofit sectors, to come together and help to develop an overarching program to guide the implementation of this work. So they meet on a monthly basis, and will continue to do so through the first quarter of next year. And their charge is to help us to identify priorities and to develop a coordinated sustainable funding strategy for a comprehensive mobility program, and to help build the community support, sustain community support that will be necessary to make sure that we can successfully bring projects to delivery. As part of this effort in this phase of work, our partners have developed what we call a State of Mobility report that's also available on our website at linkuscolumbus.com. It's really a next foundational element following our framework strategy that identifies what we call the why of comprehensive mobility infrastructure investment. And it outlines the state of the system today, both in terms of transit, as well as our greenway system, our bikeways, our pedestrian infrastructure, and also our vision for a more sustainable future for the region. Columbus is right now in the process of adopting its first climate action plan, which has very ambitious goals for greenhouse gas reductions, and LinkUs is integrated as a key action item in that action plan for helping us to achieve mode shift and to reduce those transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions. Part of the State of Mobility report is highlighting the opportunity we have to integrate various citywide and regional initiatives that are already underway, all oriented around this idea of more equitable growth for our city and our region. So LinkUs is at the heart of this, but also the city of Columbus being not the only, but the largest, of course, municipality in our region. We are now undertaking a comprehensive update of our zoning code, which has not been comprehensively updated since 1950, since those annexation policies and growth patterns were that I talked about earlier were set in motion. As well as a regional housing strategy that MRPC, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, has established, and many other initiatives that we see as aligned and mutually supportive. This really is about, pun intended, linking these things together with the LinkUs initiative. So we're looking at a comprehensive program with transit being the backbone, of course, but also greenways, sidewalks, bikeways, mobility hubs, such as Andy talked about, being those physical locations where we can integrate infrastructure and technology, roadway improvements. What does this mean for housing along these corridors, and other investments in technology or broadband access, this more comprehensive approach. Part of this is we're doing a really thorough review of all of the great planning work that our municipalities in our region has already undertaken. I mentioned NextGen. MRPC has our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is the clearinghouse of a vast array of potential transportation projects with a horizon year of 2050, but not all with an identified funding source. We also have a Vision Zero initiative in the city of Columbus and an action plan that we adopted earlier this year. And there's a really robust vision for an integrated greenway system that we call Central Ohio Greenways. So we're inventorying all of these plans and identifying what are the priorities, what are the linkages between these to create an integrated physical system that is truly multimodal and mutually supportive. And from that work, where we're at right now is developing a subset of what we call priority networks for each mode of the transportation system, the bicycle system, sidewalk priority areas, of course, the high capacity rapid transit lines, as well as the remainder of the fixed route transit system and on-demand portions of the transit system, the greenway system, strategic roadway investments, and working with our leadership coalition to continue to refine those priorities based on our goals for more equitable growth over the next 20 to 30 years. And the expected outcomes of the work of the leadership coalition, our committees, we're borrowing a page from a process that the city of Charlotte has undertaken over the past year or so. So this is an example. They have a task force report from their Charlotte Moves process, which identifies this comprehensive program, a funding strategy, and action plans. We'll be developing a similar type of document in the first quarter of 2022. And at the end of the day, we like to bring ourselves back to the bigger picture. We can get really far in the weeds as we think about the design of these corridors and the specific infrastructure investments, the design of the public right of way or private development. But this is about creating great places for the people who live in our region or who don't live here yet, but will in the future. And bringing more equitable access to opportunity, more prosperity for our region. Economic vibrancy, making sure that we remain a competitive region nationally, and that we have more equitable outcomes for the people who live in Columbus and Central Ohio. And really, we've identified that this is a pivotal moment in time. We're really excited, of course, about the infrastructure bill that is now law, more federal funding coming our way and throughout the country. And this is our time to really harness that and leverage it. It's also our opportunity to be proactive. We're beginning to experience growth pressures such as other cities have been experiencing. I mentioned Charlotte, Austin as well, Nashville, cities that have been rapidly growing and are now reacting to those growth pains with pretty substantial transportation infrastructure investments. We're trying to get ahead of that curve, and we're really well positioned to do that. And really, as I mentioned, this really hinges on collaboration. That's the core innovation of LinkUs, is the level of collaboration amongst our agencies throughout the region, and operating in a way that we haven't in the past. And that collaboration really is key to how we will develop the strategy, implement the strategy, and deliver real change on the ground. With that, I encourage folks to go to our website, linkuscolumbus.com. My contact info is here as well. You can review our materials. And if you're interested, you can follow us on social media as well. And I will now hand this over to Mackenzie Love for her portion of the webinar. Just a moment, Mackenzie.
Thanks, Justin. I'll just go ahead and say thank you to you and Andy for the presentations today. It's been a pleasure to be on a panel with both of you. Great. Give me just a minute, everyone, to get my screen set up here. There you go, I think. If someone on the panel could give me confirmation that that's being seen.
Looks good.
Thank you. With that, I'd also like to thank all of the attendees on the webinar today. My name is Mackenzie Love. I am a regional transportation planner for the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, or NVTA, and also the Secretary Treasurer of the Transportation Planning Division of APA. And it's just a joy to have you all here and see your interest in innovation in transportation. With that, I'll dive right into the topic of the NVTA's Inaugural Transportation Technology Strategic Plan, or TTSP. The NVTA is responsible for long-range transportation project planning, prioritization, and funding of regional projects in Northern Virginia. And this work is guided by two overarching goals: to reduce congestion and move the greatest number of people in the most cost-effective manner. And we've found that the potential of technology to contribute towards these goals has been increasing over time. With this increased potential also comes a lot of change to production, management, and governance. And we started to ask ourselves the question, how do we keep pace with this innovation while leveraging the potential benefits and mitigating any negative outcomes? To help us answer this, NVTA's CEO established a Transportation Technology Committee 2 years ago and charged them with developing the Transportation Technology Strategic Plan, which I'll refer to as TTSP for the remainder of this presentation. The inaugural TTSP is comprised of 8 strategies and 9 roles for NVTA to take, and embraces our core values of safety, equity, and sustainability. Those 8 strategies and the associated action plan were unanimously adopted by our authority in May of this year. So the TTSP was developed as a tool to inform a proactive approach to transportation technologies. And it was really critical for NVTA that this be done in a way that prioritized the region's visions and that it be needs-driven rather than technology driven. That is to say, the Ttsp is intended to find ways technologies can improve our approach to established and agreed upon needs, rather than finding needs for technologies that present themselves as they enter the market. To be able to do this work effectively, the Ttsp needs to be able to evolve over time, just as technology does. So we are maintaining it as a living document. And that means that we have the ability to move any significant changes through a review and approval cycle fairly quickly to be able to keep pace with innovation. It also includes an action plan that recommends targeted steps to be taken over different periods of time, from the immediate future into the long term, to facilitate building on a momentum in adopting those innovative approaches to transportation. Now that I've given you a brief background on the development and the intentions behind the Ttsp, I'll give you an overview of the 8 strategies that comprise it. The first strategy is to reduce congestion and increase throughput. And we'll implement this in a way that will help us not only integrate new technologies through things like capital projects, etc., but also in a manner that helps us utilize innovation to maximize the infrastructure that already exists and make sure that we're avoiding any obsolescence and maximizing the return on any investments Nvta makes in the region. The second strategy is to maximize access to jobs, employees, and housing. And the third is to maximize cybersecurity and privacy for members of the public. So we always take that aspect into mind when considering quality of life in this context. Strategy 4 is to minimize the potential for zero occupancy passenger vehicles. I want to take a minute to talk about that modifier there, passenger. And we added this to the established term of zero occupancy vehicle because there might be instances in which vehicles deliver parcels or other freight-based services, and having passenger capacity in them would not really increase their utility, and we did not want to exclude this use case by any means. Strategy 5 is to develop pricing mechanisms that manage travel demand and provide sustainable travel options. A key concept for us here is to not only look at tolls and fees, etc., but also how the revenues of those could be reinvested in equitable transportation solutions, and how we might be able to use incentives to contribute to a well-rounded approach to travel demand management. Strategy 6 is to maximize the potential of physical and communications infrastructure to serve existing and emerging modes. So physical infrastructure could be things like including cabinet space at an intersection or interchange that could eventually house connected vehicle infrastructure like roadside units, while the communications infrastructure could talk about things like cellular network and the systems to support data collection. So you're really covering a breadth of things that will be needed to prepare for these emerging modes and innovations as we move forward in time. Strategy 7 is to enhance regional coordination and encourage interoperability in the travel system. And here we're really getting at the idea that it is critical for there to be a seamless travel experience for the public, both in terms of connected and autonomous vehicles, but also through transit signal priority and a variety of other technologies. As we know, our communities don't often change their travel patterns when they hit a jurisdictional boundary. We want to make sure there's interoperability. The final strategy is number 8, to advance decarbonization of the transportation system. Here we're looking at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigating environmental impacts through things like electrification, specifically and especially in regards to shuttles and transit. To accomplish these strategies that I just spoke about, there are 9 roles that the Nvta can fulfill in pursuing them. These fall into 3 categories. The first is those that are served by the authority itself, those that are served by staff, and those that are best accomplished when the authority and its staff work closely together. You can see all of them on your screen here, but I'm going to walk through one illustrative example of each category of roles to give you an idea of how they all might work together. The first, which is allocated to the authority, is funding. The authority may consider adding a scoring metric to our long-range transportation plan transaction that concerns itself with the goals of the Ttsp. In the second category, we'll look at the role of championing, in which both the authority and the staff may work together to champion prioritization of forward-thinking infrastructure in other plans in our region and other regional initiatives so that we are synergistic with our entire community. The final category of roles includes that of planning, which is accomplished by staff. And through this, we might encourage the Ttsp to inform development of our next iteration of our long-range plan, which actually is underway now, and we're looking forward to strengthening that relationship even further as we move forward to adoption of transaction. These 9 roles that you see on the screen are certainly not all of those that are needed to maximize the good and minimize the bad of innovation. These are a subset that are tailored to what Nvta can accomplish. But even with these in this realm, we know that it will take the coordination of many stakeholders across our region and the type of teamwork that is integral to all of Nvta's activities. As I mentioned earlier, the Ttsp strategies and associated action plans were adopted in May of this year. So it has been 6 months since that point, and we've been moving forward with implementation ever since that time. Nvta staff have completed several deliverables, and you'll see an overview of them on your screen here. They include things like introducing a technology-related section to our annual legislative program, pending authority action and approval, of course. We created a homepage for Ttsp and all other technology initiatives related to Nvta on our website. And we've been doing a great deal of outreach through the transaction outreach process and public engagement activities. We've also made some minor updates to the Ttsp, including the addition of a technology timeline, and we were able to do this because it is maintained as a living document. There are also several activities that are ongoing, and these include compiling initial drafts of a white paper on emissions and 2 technical memoranda on different technologies that are emerging in our region now. And all 3 of these papers will be subject to a forthcoming committee review process before they are published. We've also worked on an initial draft of a transportation policy template, and any policies developed with that will be informed by, of course, a substantial review process and any of the outcomes of the 3 technical papers compiled thus far. In the next 6 months of implementation, we will undertake efforts to integrate the Ttsp more deeply into our long-range plan, and we will draft additional white papers and technical memoranda as appropriate. We'll also lead a collaborative process to identify and prioritize topics for future regional transportation policies. And finally, additional topics will be considered for addition to the Ttsp as completely new strategies. We will also identify technology-related refinements to the future Nvta 6-year project selection process after we complete our transaction update. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone again. And if you would like to stay up to date on the work around the Ttsp or any of Nvta's other activities, I encourage you to reach out to us via email or any of these social media platforms and websites that you see on your screen there. With that, I'll turn it back over to Christine to lead us through question and answers.
Thank you. We do have a couple minutes here. So folks, if you have questions, go ahead and type them in there. We'll see what we can get to. Let's start with you, Mackenzie, since you just finished up, you are fresh in our minds. So are the strategies in the Ttsp listed in any priority?
Thank you. That's a great question. No, they're not listed in priority. We kind of envision them all synergizing together and creating a comprehensive approach to technology as we can. So we want to make sure that they're all valued equally as they come up as technologies emerge.
Thank you. Let's see. Justin, since I see you here, Andy, don't forget to throw your webcam back on so we can see you. So Justin, the advancements you're making on these BRT corridors are so exciting. And then something that I see that I don't like says, P.S. Go blue. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have even read it, frankly. What am I thinking? What are the criteria to select alternatives for the northwest transit corridor? Unmute yourself, please.
Oh, so you didn't, that person did not hear I said their question was disqualified because of the go.
Right? I know.
Yeah. All right. One of the criteria is has to go through the Ohio State University campus, which it does. Very close to Ohio Stadium. So part of the Northwest corridor, as the Northwest was the first corridor that we began our what we call pre-planning. And West Broad and East Main, they got sort of just after, but they've advanced a little more quickly. Northwest is a much more complex corridor from an engineering perspective. We spent a lot of time developing a pretty robust set of metrics. I think about 40 different quantitative and qualitative metrics to evaluate the different alignments we were looking at. And all of those metrics, they roll up under those 6 themes or major goals of LinkUs that I had on one of our slides. And we set that sort of framework, well, in the framework strategy, we recognize the need to use our goals to drive metrics for decision making. And that has set a template for each of the corridors as we move forward. All of those metrics also ultimately need to roll up under the evaluation criteria categories that the FTA uses. So as these projects move from planning into the formal project development process with the FTA, there are a series of formal categories and very prescriptive metrics that the FTA requires us to use. So as we move into really understanding the cost effectiveness, the balance between project cost on the infrastructure side and the projected ridership for the BRT lines. Those are key metrics as well as other metrics around our land use. Well, metrics, these are more qualitative, but an assessment of our land use policies and zoning requirements, as well as housing policies and things of that nature to ensure that we're actually setting up the development environment in a way that's going to be supportive of the transit investment. So if you go to our website, you can dig into the reports and there's pages on metrics.
Thank you. How has LinkUs adapted to the changes due to COVID?
Yeah, so when the pandemic hit, we had not yet actually even launched LinkUs as a brand. It's amazing how much has happened just since since lockdown began. We were getting ready to have a really big, flashy mobility transit symposium in a theater and have 300 people come and make a big thing out of it and launch this new initiative. And that was like supposed to happen 3 weeks after the lockdown started. And then, of course, one of the initial questions was, well, does this change everything? You know, we're not supposed to ride transit. People are working from home all of a sudden. Does this upend our entire long-term growth strategy? And very quickly, I'm very thankful for our political leadership. They and our executive administrative leadership got together, had a conversation, said, you know what, we're still growing, we're still going to grow. Things are going to change and we might have to pivot, but the fundamentals of what we're trying to do, they stand, and the leadership direction is there to move forward. This is still part of a long-term growth strategy, and we know that we can't continue to grow the way we have, and we can't rely on, even with autonomous vehicles coming online, which we're all excited about at some point, there's only so much efficiency we're going to get out of that system if we continue to grow the way we do. And so some form of rapid transit is part of our growth vision for our future. So that remains the same. How this plays out, in terms of how quickly things get implemented, what the impact of work from home is on ridership. There are some technical things that we're going to have to work out. The whole transportation modeling world is upended right now, so we're working through that, but it doesn't change the fundamentals of where we're headed.
Okay, thank you. You're off the hook for a minute. Andy, you're up. Can you talk a little bit more about equity as it relates to Smart Columbus? What focus was there on non-smartphone using folks in the studies and the plan? That was just the example given, but maybe you could kind of take a step back and walk us through some of the things that were taken into consideration when thinking about equity.
Sure. Smartphone's a great example. One of our projects was our prenatal trip assistance project. And that was designed to help pregnant women get more reliable, convenient access to healthcare and other services that are needed when you're pregnant. Our researchers at OSU led the study, and as part of that, they had just previously completed a study that to see how much usage of smartphones occurred with low-income women. And what they found was it was over 90% of women had access to smartphones and Wi-Fi, whether it be public or private, and over 95% had access to a cell phone. So that made us feel very good that we are working in a way that is going to provide equitable access. Although with that project too, because we wanted to ensure that everyone did have equal opportunity, we provided a website, the smartphone app, and then a call center too, to ensure that everyone had access. So that's one way we went about things to ensure that we were providing equitable transportation. With our smart mobility hubs, our Pivot app, that's why we put one of the reasons why we put the kiosks at our smart mobility hubs. In case you did not have a cell phone, you could access the app at the kiosk and you could plan your trip in order to know where you need to navigate. So we really did take that into account.
And also kind of off topic, I guess, just because I'm aware of it, because I live in Ohio, infant mortality in the past few years has become a huge issue, particularly in the Columbus area. And I know that there have been a lot of initiatives established to combat that. And particularly for African-American women, it's like 2.5 times, infant mortality is like 2.5 times greater. The numbers are literally staggering for Columbus. And like you mentioned with this, I know studies have been done and the transportation is a major issue for women getting to appointments. And this is just, it's absolutely critical. And, and I thought it was really interesting too. I believe there's a planner hired with the public health department even, or several planners hired within public health, just to help kind of bridge that gap. This was a few years ago when I remember hearing this session. So anyway, I think we need to have a session on this. I need to get some people together to talk about this and the importance of transportation and equity, just at least from, from the perspective of getting folks to their doctor's appointments, just something as simple as that. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah, we could, believe me, we could talk for hours about all we learned through that project alone. Is amazing. Yes, unfortunately, when we started Smart Columbus had the highest infant mortality rate in the country. So that just shows what issues we're trying to resolve, and the mayor started to Celebrate One to help develop those programs to solve those issues, and we have seen decreases in transportation, just one of the factors impacting infant mortality.
Right. Someone just typed in transportation policy is health policy. Yes.
Absolutely.
100%. Yes. Okay. Next question. There are still some questions, Andy, about the function of the Wi-Fi enabled kiosk. Could you break it down a little bit more?
That what is entailed or what's involved with the kiosk. So the kiosk, you can look it up. Ike, I-K-E kiosk. They were installed by Orange Barrel, and it has a wealth of information on it. There's several different windows, destinations, community information, where to go to eat, what's happening in Columbus, all sorts of stuff. And one of the applications in the kiosk is the trip planning application. So you can enter in that origin destination, set preferences, and know how to get from that mobility hub to wherever your destination is. Another feature of that is the emergency call button. That was something that we got feedback from a community that were using these facilities. Hey, it would be nice if we had this available to us in case there is some type of emergency. So they're also a part of the kiosk too, and it goes directly to 911.
Thank you. Let's talk about the elderly for a second. How do they play into this? I know, we were just talking about smartphones and how sometimes that might be difficult for certain populations, including the elderly. For those that might not be tech savvy, what else do we do for them that, for elderly folks that might not be interested in the kiosk? What do we do for them?
From a trip planning perspective, so we also have a web portal available, so you can log into your computer. So you don't have to have a smartphone. So you can log into your computer, and most people have access to computers or the public libraries that we found too. So you can get access to trip planning through that web portal. And I would say that we had another project that was specifically developed to help people navigate the fixed bus route system. So in this instance, it was transitioning from paratransit to fixed bus route. But we found that there was many uses for it too, and it could help elderly in navigating. And that was another smartphone app, but it was very, very detailed, and it was something where you could customize, if you're a caregiver, customize the application to allow the person to have text, audio, and pictures to navigate them to their destination, just to help with that sense of comfort and independence. Something else that we worked on too.
And Andy, there was a similar sort of customized app oriented towards those on the autism spectrum as well, correct?
Yes, yeah. It was one of those things where it was specifically, we were looking for folks with cognitive disabilities, which autism was included, but then also there was some interest from the elderly community, you could say.
A quick clarification question, Mackenzie. Are zero occupancy vehicles the same thing as autonomous vehicles? Like, is it a type of autonomous vehicle? What do we call it? Where do we put it? Find a bucket.
Find a bucket. So a zero occupancy vehicle would be an autonomous vehicle with no human passengers in it. And the reason that we distinguish between zero occupancy vehicles and zero occupancy passenger vehicles is that there's some freight or delivery devices that don't need a human passenger, but they could look quite like a car or they could look different. And those don't necessarily need to have the capacity to move humans around. They could, if they can operate autonomously or be controlled remotely. Otherwise, a zero occupancy vehicle would be a vehicle that could have human passengers in it, but does not because it is currently operating autonomously. I hope that answers the question, but let me know if it doesn't.
Yeah, no, that sounds good to me. I think we're going to wrap up. All the rest of these questions are going to take too long. There were a lot of questions. People are really interested in this. Folks, if you still have burning questions, you can reach directly out to our panelists today. If you can't find their contact information through Google search or whatever, you can always just contact me and I'll get you hooked up into them. As a reminder, we are recording the session. We will have it up on our YouTube channel. We also will have a combined PDF slide deck of these presentations up on our webcast website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. Don't forget to log those CM credits. And thank you to the Transportation Planning Division for hosting today's session. Thank you to our panelists. We appreciate you and all of the work that you are doing towards this and for spending your afternoon with us. So thank you. And everyone have a great weekend and we'll talk next time.